In today's episode, we're going to talk all about health anxiety, previously referred to as hypochondriasis, something that has been exacerbated or brought about in many by the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm going to discuss what it is, as well as my tips for how to cope with it. Welcome to Calmly Coping. I'm your host, Tati Garcia. I'm a licensed therapist and a high-functioning anxiety coach. Calmly Coping is the podcast for people who struggle with anxiety and high-functioning anxiety. Each Wednesday, you'll hear informative episodes with actionable tips about decreasing anxiety, adopting a healthy mindset, and managing your time and energy so you can live a calm and balanced life. Let's get started. This is episode number 34, How to Cope with Health Anxiety. Welcome back if you're returning, and welcome if you're a first-time listener. Thank you so much for tuning in. Just as a quick disclaimer, this episode is not meant to be used for self-diagnosis, but to provide you with information to help you better understand health anxiety and how to cope with it. So you've probably heard of hypochondria, the person who fears that they have a tumor, cancer, and they go to the doctor repetitively because they fear that they have an illness. One example of this is in the movie My Girl. The 11-year-old main character, Veda Sultanfuss, goes to her local physician and is often complaining of medical or physical ailments. Veda's father is a funeral director, and she's often complaining of the ailments that the recently deceased in her funeral home have suffered from. Ultimately, health anxiety is often rooted in the fear of death and or the fear of suffering. So there are two different types of health anxiety. The first is illness anxiety disorder, and this is a preoccupation with having or acquiring a serious illness. This often results in excessive health-related behaviors, such as repeatedly checking the body for signs of illness or avoiding doctor's appointments and hospitals. People with health anxiety will also often tend to seek reassurance from others, even if they aren't qualified to provide it. And they may get sucked down the black hole of asking Dr. Google to diagnose them. The second type of health anxiety is somatic symptom disorder. And this is when you have excessive thoughts, feelings, or behaviors related to the somatic symptoms, and these are the physical symptoms, or associated health concerns as manifested by at least one of the following. So you may have disproportionate and persistent thoughts about the seriousness of your symptoms, persistent high levels of anxiety about health or symptoms, and excessive time and energy is devoted to these symptoms or health concerns. So ultimately, both of these types of health anxiety are related to health issues. So before we get to how to cope with health anxiety, let's take a quick break. If you're a high achiever who struggles with putting way too much pressure on yourself, you have difficulty disconnecting, and you feel like you can never fully relax, then you'll want to enroll in my free 3-day course, How to Calm Your Mind So You Can Finally Relax. In this free course, I walk you through getting to the root of what's preventing you from fully relaxing, learning my Relax framework to help you identify the best ways to relax and recharge, and how you can relax intentionally so that you set yourself up for long-term success. You can enroll in this free course by going to calmlycoping.com/relax or by clicking on the link in the show notes. So here are my tips for how to cope with health anxiety. Tip number 1 is that whatever you do, do not Google your symptoms, illnesses, or any other health-related fears. That's because this often increases anxiety, overthinking, and catastrophizing. So you're just fueling that fire of anxiety and overthinking when you do this. And that's because often Google or WebMD or whatever you use is going to show you the worst potential outcome, even though this is often very unlikely the explanation for what's going on. So you're also referring to the internet to diagnose you, and as we probably know, the internet is not always a factual tool, and it can never replace the opinion of an expert. So I highly recommend not resorting to Google and resisting those urges to search. It can often be hard to resist these urges because anxiety comes from a place of uncertainty. And so what we want to do is we want to seek out information, but we want to make sure that the sources that you're seeking out information from are actually qualified and actually accurate. And Googling those questions or symptoms is not going to necessarily be an accurate place to get your information from. Tip number 2 is to look at the facts in the situation and not your fear. Anxiety is always going to tell you that an outcome is possible and it feels more likely than it actually is. And that's because your fear and your alarm system is more sensitive and elevated. That's why it's so important to focus on the facts, not what you don't know or what could be. When you focus on the facts and not the what ifs, then you're much less likely to fall into that downward thought spiral of catastrophizing and thinking of the worst case scenario. Tip number 3 is to rule out any medical diagnoses. When in doubt, go to the doctor and seek out professional advice. If this is something that you tend to avoid because going to the doctor makes you anxious, then seek out support from others. Ask if a family member or a friend will help you make the appointment or accompany you to the appointment. Now, this might be more difficult in the days of COVID because a lot of doctors' offices are only allowing the patient to come in. But even if that support waits in the car for you, then that may be more helpful and can provide you with that support that you need to get the courage to go to the appointment. It also can be helpful to write down the questions that you want to ask the doctor before going so that you can be sure you don't forget anything when you're feeling anxious in the moment, because that anxiety can make it easier to forget those things that you want to ask or that you want to say. Another thing to be aware of is that if you struggle with health anxiety, this can actually increase your blood pressure and make it appear that you have high blood pressure. Now, what I'm saying here is not to be taken as medical advice, but this is just something to be aware of. Keep this in mind and communicate with your doctor, letting them know that you experience anxiety about going to the doctor so that they can be aware of this and keep that in mind when assessing you and looking at your symptoms. So tip number 4, that brings us to experiencing somatic or physical symptoms as a result of health fears. This tip is to recognize that your checking behavior and your hypervigilance or hyper-awareness may be increasing your experience of somatic symptoms. Here are a few examples. So let's say if you're constantly swallowing to check for a sore throat, that can actually irritate your throat more than making it appear like you actually have these symptoms of a sore throat when you may not. Another example might be touching a lump to constantly check it may irritate it more and result in more inflammation, making it appear that the lump is getting bigger. Now, of course, this does not apply in every single scenario, but these are just things to be aware of how you may be contributing to or exacerbating the experience of somatic symptoms. Another example is that hypervigilance of your body temperature may make it appear that you're experiencing more changes in body temperature than you actually are. And a final thing to keep in mind is that anxiety itself can also result in many physical symptoms, such as numbness, panic attacks that can feel like heart attacks, stomach discomfort, physical tension, muscle twitches, fogginess, and a lot more. So that's why it's so important to seek the advice of a medical doctor and a behavioral health provider if you're struggling with any of these concerns. Of course, when in doubt, be safe. But if you know that your health anxiety may be contributing to or exacerbating your experience, then that's important to be aware of as well and recognize how you may be contributing to those somatic symptoms and that experience that you're having. Tip number 5 is specific to COVID. And so this is to avoid the news regarding COVID, regarding deaths, or any articles regarding symptoms or anything else. It's important to stay safe, of course, but don't expose yourself to any information that may increase your anxiety, because this is again going to increase that cycle of overthinking and anxious thoughts. And tip number 6 is to resist the urge to check, as well as to seek reassurance from others. Checking for symptoms and seeking reassurance from others actually increases your anxiety in the long run. And that's because you're looking to external sources in order to decrease your anxiety rather than decreasing it personally from within. So make a mental note of those urges to check and seek reassurance from others and label them. The anxious part of my mind wants to check, and I can choose whether to follow through with this or not. Engage in a positive coping skill or something else that may take the focus off of this thought. So those are my tips to help you cope with health anxiety. Health anxiety can feel really uncomfortable and scary. And remember that you aren't alone in feeling this way. Although you cannot control your physical health, you can control the way that you think and how you choose to take care of your health. Taking control over your physical health by exercising and eating well can also help you cope with health anxiety. So your action tip for this episode is to make a list of do's and don'ts for your health anxiety. So here are some examples. So do focus on the facts, rule out medical diagnoses by going to the doctor, and practice positive coping skills. Don't Google symptoms or diagnoses, avoid the doctor, check for symptoms repetitively, or seek reassurance from those who are unqualified, or watch the news regarding COVID if it increases your anxiety. So put this tip into action and let me know how it helps. I'd love to hear your feedback. You can DM me on Instagram at TatianaGLPC or email me at tati@becalmwithtati.com and let me know. And if you found this podcast episode informative, please leave me a review on iTunes letting me know your thoughts. It really helps me out. While you wait for next week's episode, I have other episodes about decreasing anxiety, adopting a healthy mindset, and managing your time and energy. Thanks for tuning in today, and until next time, be calm. Thanks so much for listening. If you like what you heard, please share this episode with a friend, and please subscribe and leave me a review on iTunes. Also, remember to check me out online at calmlycoping.com and connect with me on Instagram at TatianaGLPC. All content here is for informational purposes only. This content does not replace the professional judgment of your own mental health provider. Please consult a licensed mental health professional for all individual questions and issues. Till next time, I'm Tati, and this has been Calmly Coping.